What would you do if your only way out of a desperate situation was to say, "I do" to a complete stranger? Today we bring you the story of a young, struggling law student, drowning in a sea of debt, who is thrown an unexpected lifeline by a 71-year-old millionaire woman. But her marriage proposal isn't about love, it's a contract. A key that unlocks a life of unbelievable luxury, but also a lock to a prison built on dark secrets. What he uncovers just 7 days after their wedding will shatter his reality, revealing a twisted past fueled by betrayal and an insatiable thirst for revenge. If you are captivated by stories where nothing is as it seems, and where every choice has a hidden price, then you've come to the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments what you would do in his impossible situation. Now settle in, as we begin our story. The Boston sky wept a cold, persistent drizzle, its gray tears slicking the historic cobblestone streets. For Liam Hayes, the gloom outside was a perfect mirror for the storm brewing within him. At just 23, he carried a weight far heavier than the law books in his worn-out backpack. He was in his final year of law school, a summit he had fought tooth and nail to reach, but the shadow of his late father's debts loomed over him like a tidal wave, threatening to pull him under. Each step toward the university library felt like wading through mud, the pressure mounting with every final notice that arrived in the mail and every worried glance from his mother. His world was a frantic juggling act, grueling lectures, late-night study sessions, and a part-time job at a diner that barely covered the rent, let alone the mountain of financial obligations. Just as he turned a corner, his phone vibrated with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another debt collector, but something compelled him to answer. "Liam Hayes speaking," he said, his voice tired. The voice that replied was nothing like the aggressive calls he was used to. It was a woman's voice, crisp and clear as winter ice, laced with an authority that commanded attention. "Mr. Hayes, this is Evelyn Sinclair. I propose we meet. It is regarding your financial predicament." Liam froze, the rain dripping from his hair onto his phone screen. "I'm sorry, who is this? How do you know about my situation?" A dry, humorless chuckle came through the line. "I know a great many things, young man. The Sinclair Tower Cafe. 7 o'clock this evening. It is in your best interest to be there." Before he could protest, the line went dead. Driven by a mixture of confusion and a desperate sliver of hope, Liam found himself standing before the gleaming entrance of the cafe that evening. Inside, sitting at an isolated table with a posture of regal stillness, was a woman who could only be Evelyn Sinclair. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her tailored suit spoke of a wealth so profound it needed no announcement. She gestured to the seat opposite her, her piercing blue eyes appraising him. "Straight to the point, Mr. Hayes. I know about your father's debts. I know you are on the brink of ruin. I am here to offer you a solution." Liam leaned forward, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm. "And what kind of solution would that be?" Evelyn set down her porcelain teacup with a delicate click, her gaze unwavering. "You will marry me." The words hung in the warm coffee-scented air of the cafe, so utterly absurd that Liam's first reaction was a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of pure, unadulterated disbelief, a sound of a mind trying to reject an impossible reality. "You're serious," he managed to say, the laugh dying in his throat. Evelyn's expression didn't flicker. "I am never anything but serious, Mr. Hayes. As I said, this is not a proposal of the heart. It is a transaction. Your complete financial freedom in exchange for your name. I require a husband to secure my legacy and solidify my estate against external pressures. You are young, unattached, and have the intelligence to understand the terms. Most importantly, you are in a position where you cannot afford to refuse." Her logic was as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through his shock and laying bare the raw truth of his desperation. Stumbling back to his feet, Liam mumbled a barely coherent excuse and fled the cafe. He didn't feel the cold rain as he walked home in a daze, Evelyn's proposition echoing in his mind with every step. The world he re-entered was a universe away from the Sinclair Tower Cafe. His small apartment was filled with the scent of chicken soup and the quiet hum of an old television. He found his mother, Sarah, resting on the sofa, a worn blanket draped over her frail shoulders. The smile she gave him was weary but full of love, and it was that smile that made what he had to say next feel like a betrayal. He sat down, the worn springs of the armchair groaning, and recounted the entire unbelievable encounter. He expected horror, outrage, an immediate dismissal of the insane idea. But as he spoke, he saw a different emotion flicker in his mother's tired eyes: calculation. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Liam," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it sounds unthinkable. To marry a woman you don't know for money." Her eyes welled with tears. "But I look at these medical bills piling up. I think about your sister Chloe, and her dreams of college. I see you, working yourself to the bone for a future that's being stolen from us." She reached out, her hand cool on his. "She is offering us a way out. I am not asking you to love her. I am asking you to consider saving yourself. To save us." Her words struck him harder than any of Evelyn's. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his mother's health, his sister's future, the very survival of their family. He looked at his hands, the hands he had hoped would one day argue for justice in a courtroom, and realized they were tied. It was no longer a matter of pride versus poverty. It was his future, measured against the lives of the two people he loved most in the world. The next morning, the Boston sky offered no reprieve, remaining a canvas of unbroken gray. Liam walked back to the Sinclair Tower Cafe, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if he were walking toward a cliff's edge. He found Evelyn in the exact same seat, a tablet glowing in front of her, the picture of calm composure. It was as if she knew he would return. His decision was not a possibility to her, but a foregone conclusion. He stood before her table, his resolve fragile. "I'll do it," he said, the words barely a whisper. Evelyn looked up from her screen, not with surprise, but with a faint, thin smile of satisfaction. "Good," she said simply, her tone all business. "The arrangements will be made immediately. Be ready." There was no time for second thoughts, no room to breathe. Exactly 1 week later, Liam found himself standing in the echoing marble hall of a downtown courthouse. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, one he had never seen before, that had been delivered to his apartment that morning. It felt less like a gift and more like a uniform, the costume for a role he was about to play. The ceremony was a quiet, sterile affair. There was no music, no flowers, no family. The only witnesses were Evelyn's stone-faced lawyer and a public notary who looked profoundly bored. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the heavy silence of bureaucracy. Liam stood numbly as the officiant droned on, the legalistic words of the marriage rite washing over him without meaning. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene from a movie about someone else's life. When it was his turn to speak, the words "I do" felt foreign in his mouth, tasting like ash. He glanced at Evelyn. She was poised and unshakable, her own "I do" delivered with the crisp finality of a gavel striking wood. This was not a union of two souls, it was the execution of a contract. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words, meant to signify a joyous beginning, landed with the thud of a cell door slamming shut. Evelyn turned to him, that same unreadable faint smile playing on her lips. There was no kiss, no warm embrace. Instead, her eyes, as cool and blue as a winter sea, held his for a moment. "Welcome to your new life, Liam," she said softly. As they walked out of the courthouse and into the waiting town car, Liam caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished black door. He saw a stranger in a fine suit, his face pale and his eyes hollow. He had sacrificed his name and his future on the altar of necessity, and a single terrifying question burned in his mind: had he just saved his family, or had he sold his very soul? The ride from the courthouse was conducted in a heavy, suffocating silence. Liam stared out the tinted window of the luxury sedan, watching the familiar, bustling streets of Boston blur and then give way to the sprawling, manicured estates of the wealthy suburbs. It felt like a journey to another country, a one-way trip away from everything he had ever known. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed and turned onto a private road, culminating before a set of imposing wrought iron gates. They creaked open slowly, like the cover of an ancient, forgotten book, inviting them into a world shrouded in secrecy. The long, winding driveway snaked through acres of perfectly sculpted gardens that were beautiful but strangely lifeless, lacking the vibrant chaos of nature. And then, the house came into view. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress of old money and solitude. Sinclair Manor loomed ahead, a sprawling stone beast of Gothic architecture, with sharp spires that seemed to pierce the grey sky. Its many windows stared out over the grounds like dark, vacant eyes, giving no hint of the life, or lack thereof, within. It was less a home and more a monument to a forgotten dynasty. As the car came to a silent stop on the gravel courtyard, a uniformed driver opened Evelyn's door. She stepped out with an air of effortless ownership, completely at one with her imposing surroundings. Liam emerged after her, feeling small and out of place, an unwelcome footnote in a long and complicated history. "Welcome to Sinclair Manor," Evelyn stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I trust you will find your accommodations satisfactory. Mrs. Albright will show you to your wing." As if on cue, a stern-looking housekeeper with her hair in a tight bun appeared at the massive oak doors. She gave a curt nod, her expression unreadable. Liam followed her silently into the cavernous foyer. The air inside was still and cool, and the sound of his footsteps echoed unervingly on the polished marble floors. Long hallways stretched out like shadowy arms, lined with oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to track his every move. His room, or rather his suite, was in a separate wing of the mansion. It was breathtakingly opulent, with a large four-poster bed, antique mahogany furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the desolate gardens. Yet, for all its splendor, the room felt cold and impersonal, like a lavish suite in a five-star hotel. It was a room designed to be admired, not lived in. He stood alone in the center of the vast space, a prisoner in a palace of polished wood and cold silk. The transaction was complete, and this gilded, silent cage was now his home. That evening, Liam felt the true, crushing weight of his isolation. He was summoned for dinner at 7 o'clock sharp. He navigated the labyrinthine hallways to a dining room so vast and ornate it could have hosted a state dinner. A single impossibly long mahogany table, polished to a dark mirror, dominated the space, reflecting the cold light of a crystal chandelier high above. Evelyn was already seated at the head of the table. A silent servant directed Liam to the opposite end, a lonely island 20 feet away. The physical distance between them was a chasm, a clear and deliberate statement of their relationship. The meal was an extravagant multi-course affair, served by staff who moved with ghostly silence. The only sounds were the faint, sharp clicks of silver on porcelain, each one echoing in the cavernous room. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible presence, until Evelyn finally broke it. "I trust you are settling in," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. It wasn't a question of comfort, but a formal inquiry. "It's different," Liam replied cautiously, his voice sounding small. "This place is enormous. It feels like a person could get lost in here." A faint smirk touched Evelyn's lips. "You'll get used to it," she said coolly. "Or you won't. Either way, you are here." Her bluntness was jarring. Desperate to find some semblance of human connection, to understand the woman he was now bound to, Liam took a risk. You didn't mention much about your late husband before. Mr. Sinclair." The effect was instantaneous. Evelyn's knife paused its surgical descent into her filet mignon. Her perfectly composed posture tightened for a fraction of a second. She placed her silverware down with deliberate precision, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, and took a slow sip of wine. When her eyes met his again, they held a new, dangerous glint. "Arthur," she began, her voice a low purr, "was a brilliant businessman. Much like your father, in some respects." The comparison sent an involuntary shiver down Liam's spine. Their paths crossed, once or twice. As you can imagine, Mr. Hayes, not all business ventures end amicably. His pulse quickened. "What do you mean by that?" Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her faint smile returning, but this time it was chilling. "Let us just say that unfinished business has a way of lingering, across generations. You'll soon understand precisely why I chose you." Her cryptic words hung in the silent air between them, thick with unspoken history and veiled threats. The rest of the meal passed in silence, but for Liam, everything had changed. He wasn't just a random, desperate student. He was a piece in a much older, darker game, one connected to his father and the ghost of the man who used to sit at the head of this very table. The days that followed bled into one another, each marked by the same suffocating routine: silent, solitary breakfasts, long hours spent wandering the echoing halls of the manor, and tense, near-silent dinners with Evelyn. The initial shock of his new life began to curdle into a persistent, gnawing suspicion. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting a house that refused to give up its secrets. He started to notice the little things, the details that painted a sinister picture. The staff, in particular, moved around him with a practiced avoidance. They were polite, yet their eyes never met his. Any attempt at casual conversation was met with short, clipped answers and a hasty retreat. It wasn't professional deference, it was fear. One afternoon, as he passed a service corridor, he overheard two housekeepers speaking in hushed, urgent tones, thinking they were alone. "Can't believe she chose him," one whispered. "Does he even know the real reason?" The other replied, her voice trembling slightly, "She never does anything without a purpose. He'll figure it out eventually. They always do." The final words sent a bolt of ice through Liam's veins. They always do. The phrase implied he wasn't the first, that this was a pattern, a well-rehearsed play in which he was the newest, unsuspecting actor. Fueled by a new sense of urgency, Liam began to explore the manor not as a resident, but as an investigator. He ventured into dusty, forgotten wings of the house, where furniture sat shrouded in white cloths like sleeping giants. The portraits on the walls seemed more menacing now, their painted eyes following his every move. His exploration inevitably led him to a hallway on the second floor, in the oldest part of the mansion. Here, several large, oak doors stood in silent opposition. Unlike the others, their brass handles were tarnished with age, and they seemed to hum with a palpable sense of secrecy. He tried each one. All were securely locked. He stood before the most ornate of these doors, its keyhole dark and empty. What was Evelyn hiding? The whispers of the staff, the cryptic warnings at the dinner table, and now these physical barriers, it was all connected. Every locked door, every averted gaze, every whispered comment was a piece of a puzzle he was now desperate to solve. He was no longer just an unwilling participant in a strange marriage. He was a prisoner, and he had to find the key, not just to this door, but to the entire terrifying mystery of Sinclair Manor. Liam knew he could not remain a passive prisoner. To find the truth, he would have to take a risk, a calculated, dangerous one. He began to study Evelyn's habits, observing her with the quiet intensity of a hunter. He learned that every afternoon between 3 and 4 o'clock, she would retreat to the estate's vast conservatory at the far end of the property to take her international business calls, a private ritual that left her personal study, her inner sanctum, unattended. This was his chance, a small window of opportunity in a fortress of control. One Tuesday afternoon, with his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, he made his move. He crept down the silent, carpeted hallway toward the west wing, the door to her study looming before him like a judgment. He pushed it open, wincing at the soft click of the latch, and slipped inside. The air in the room was still, thick with the scent of old leather, aging paper, and the faint, expensive perfume that clung to Evelyn herself. It was the nerve center of her empire. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a massive mahogany desk sat like an altar in the center of the room, its surface a testament to her meticulous nature, neat stacks of documents, a silver letter opener, a black fountain pen. His eyes scanned the desk, searching for anything out of place, any clue left unguarded. And then he saw it. Resting in a small mother-of-pearl dish, almost as if it were a piece of art, was a single ornate key. It was old, its shaft made of dark, heavy iron, but its head was intricately designed and plated in what looked like real gold. It was a key from another era, a key that radiated importance. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it belonged to one of the locked doors on the second floor. For a moment, he was paralyzed by fear. The thought of Evelyn returning, of being caught in this ultimate act of betrayal, was terrifying. But the whispers in the hallway and the cold, dead look in her eyes at dinner were more so. This was his only way to uncover the truth. He listened for any sound from the hall, nothing but the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. With a deep breath, his hand darted out, his fingers closing around the cool, heavy metal. He slipped the key into his pocket, where it felt like a lead weight, a tangible piece of his transgression. He backed out of the room, closing the door without a sound, and retreated to his own wing, his mind racing. He had crossed a line. He had stolen the key to Evelyn's secrets. Now, all that remained was to find the courage to turn it in the lock. Here is the story's continuation, Part 8. Part 8, Uncovering the Hidden Secrets. The music fades to an almost inaudible low hum, creating a palpable silence filled with tension. Sleep was an impossibility. The golden key felt like a burning coal in Liam's pocket, a secret he couldn't bear to keep until morning. When the grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 2, and the entire manor was cloaked in the deep, profound silence of the night, he knew it was time. He slipped out of his room, his bare feet making no sound on the thick runners of the hallway carpets. The house was a different creature in the dark, a maze of shifting shadows and imagined whispers. Every creak of the ancient floorboards under his weight sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. He reached the forbidden hallway on the second floor, the moonlight from a tall, arched window casting long skeletal shadows on the floor. He approached the ornate oak door, his hand trembling as he raised the key. It slid into the old lock with a gritty metallic scrape. He paused, holding his breath, listening. Nothing. With a slow, deliberate turn, the lock mechanism groaned and then gave way with a loud, definitive click that seemed to echo through the entire mansion. For a heart-stopping moment, he was sure he had woken the entire household. But the silence held. He pushed the door open, and a wave of musty, stale air washed over him, the scent of years of undisturbed dust and decay. The room was a time capsule. Moonlight filtered through a grimy window, illuminating a space frozen in another era. Furniture was draped in ghostly white sheets, and the wallpaper was faded and peeling. In the center of the room, uncovered, sat a large, handsome desk. Drawn by an invisible force, Liam moved toward it. Tarnished silver frames lay on the desk's surface. He picked one up. It was a photograph of a much younger Evelyn, her arm linked with a handsome, smiling man who must have been Arthur Sinclair. They looked vibrant, happy, a world away from the cold, bitter woman who now ruled this house. But it was the stack of papers beside the frames that held the real secret. They were legal documents, their edges yellowed and brittle with age. And on them, Liam saw two names, side by side, Arthur Sinclair and Robert Hayes, his father. His blood ran cold as he scanned the documents, which detailed a massive real estate partnership that had collapsed into financial ruin. Beneath them was a letter, written on heavy cream stationery. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, and full of rage. It was Evelyn's. The letter was addressed to his father, and its words were venom. "Because of your greed and your lies," he read, "you have destroyed everything we built. Arthur's heart, his spirit, it was all broken by your betrayal. You left our family with nothing but debt and shame. I promise you, a debt of this magnitude, it does not simply go away. Your family will pay." It all crashed down on him in that dusty, silent room. The cryptic remarks, the arranged marriage, his specific selection. This wasn't about securing a legacy. This was a vendetta. A cold, patient, and terrifying revenge, decades in the making. Reeling from the revelation in the letter, Liam's gaze fell back to the desk. His eyes caught the corner of a dark leather-bound book peeking out from a half-open drawer. With a sense of dread, he pulled it out. It was a diary, its cover worn smooth with time. He opened it, and his breath hitched. The pages were filled with the same sharp, elegant, and venomous handwriting. He had found Evelyn's private thoughts, the chronicle of her long and patient hatred. He flipped through the pages, a timeline of her pain and plotting unfolding before his eyes. An entry from 20 years ago, shortly after her husband's death, was written with a hand that shook with rage. The doctors called it a heart attack. I know the truth. It was a broken heart, shattered by the betrayal of Robert Hayes. He took our fortune, our future, and then he took my Arthur. A debt like that must be repaid in kind. Soul for soul. He skipped ahead a decade. The grief had cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous. Years of rebuilding, of clawing my way back from the abyss he cast me into. But I never forgot. I watched from the shadows. And now, a miracle of cruel fate. Robert Hayes is dead, but he left a son. A law student, drowning in the very debts his father created. The irony is so exquisitely perfect, it must be destiny. Finally, he found an entry from just a few months ago, and the words on the page stole the air from his lungs. The plan is in its final stage. He has taken the bait. Once we are married, his name, the Hayes name, will give me the legal standing to dismantle the last of the old dormant partnership trusts. I will use the son to reclaim every last cent the father stole. And when I am finished, I will sever the ties and leave him with absolutely nothing, a mirror image of the ruin his family brought upon mine. He is not a husband, he is a key. A pawn in a game that began before he was born. A perfect, unsuspecting tool. The words on the page seemed to burn with a cold fire. A tool. A pawn. A key. As this final horrifying realization cemented itself in his mind, a sound from behind him cut through the dead silence of the room. A soft, deliberate creak of a floorboard in the hall. Liam froze, his blood turning to ice. The sound had come from the doorway. He was so engrossed, he hadn't heard anyone approach. Slowly, every muscle in his body screaming, he lifted his eyes from the diary's venomous script. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim moonlight of the hallway, a shadow that had been watching him. He wasn't alone. The silhouette stepped forward from the shadows, and the dim moonlight illuminated Evelyn's sharp, aristocratic features. She was dressed in a long silk robe, looking not surprised or angry, but utterly terrifyingly composed. She held a small glass of brandy in one hand, as if she had been expecting him all along. Her eyes flickered from Liam's face down to the open diary in his hands. "Well," she said, her voice a low, chilling purr that cut through the silence. "It seems your curiosity has finally gotten the better of you. Find what you were looking for?" Liam scrambled to his feet, knocking the chair back with a loud clatter. The diary felt like it was burning his skin. "All of it," he stammered, his voice a mixture of fear and newfound rage. "The marriage, the money, it was all just a setup. A trap." Evelyn took a slow, deliberate step into the room, her presence seeming to suck all the air out. "A trap?" she mused, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "No, Liam. Not a trap. A strategy. A rather brilliant one, I think you'll agree, for settling an old and very significant debt. This is about my father." Liam's voice grew stronger, fueled by the adrenaline of confrontation. "This is some twisted game of revenge for something that happened 20 years ago." "Revenge is a messy, emotional word," Evelyn countered, stopping just a few feet from him. Her eyes were as cold and hard as diamonds. "I prefer to think of it as balancing the books. Your father was a thief who broke my husband's heart and stole our future. He died before he could pay what he owed. You, my dear boy, are simply the final installment on his account." Her condescending tone made his fists clench. "I had nothing to do with it. I'm not him." "Oh, but you are," she whispered, stepping closer still, invading his space. Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You are his son. And you are my husband. You signed the papers. You took the money. Your mother rests comfortably in a private care facility that I pay for. Your sister is enrolled in a university she could only have dreamed of, on my dime." She was so close now he could smell the faint scent of brandy on her breath. "Do not for one second think you have any power here. You are in my world now. You will play your part, you will smile when I tell you to smile, and you will do exactly as you are told. If you try to fight me, if you even think of betraying me, you will discover that the financial ruin you were so afraid of would have been a mercy compared to what I will do to your family." She held his gaze for a beat longer, letting the threat sink in, before turning on her heel and gliding out of the room. She left him standing there, shaking, in the dusty mausoleum of her past. The truth hadn't set him free. It had just revealed the true size and shape of his cage, and the cold, merciless nature of its keeper. Liam retreated to his room, but the vast, luxurious space now felt like a cold, shrinking cell. Evelyn's threat echoed in his mind, a venomous promise that chained him in place. He paced the floor for hours, a caged animal, his mind a whirlwind of fear and impotent rage. He was trapped. Any move he made could bring ruin upon his mother and sister, the very people he had entered this hell to protect. Sleep was a distant country he knew he could not visit that night. It was in the deepest hour of the night, when the moon was high and the house was utterly still, that he heard it. A faint, muffled sound. It was Evelyn's voice, coming from the direction of her study. She was supposed to be asleep. What was she doing up at this hour? Driven by a desperate need to understand the full scope of his predicament, he crept out of his room once more. He moved like a shadow through the dark corridors, his senses on high alert. He followed the sound to her study. The heavy oak door was closed, but not fully latched. A thin sliver of golden light escaped from the crack, along with the sound of her sharp, commanding voice. She was on the phone. Pressing his ear carefully against the cold wood, Liam listened. "The timeline is not negotiable," she was saying, her tone stripped of all pretense, leaving only cold, hard business. "The final transfer must be initiated within the next 48 hours. Is everything in place on your end?" There was a pause. Yes, the marriage was the final legal key. Using his name, as a direct descendant of Robert Hayes, allows us to bypass the covenant restrictions on the primary trust. Another pause, and her voice became even sharper. "I am managing him. He is a non-issue. Just confirm that the transaction is ready to be executed." He is in too deep to back out now, not when we are this close to the finish line. The deadline is absolute. Time is running out. Liam pulled back from the door, his blood running cold. Transfer. His name. 48 hours. Time is running out. The words slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a slow, simmering revenge. It was an active, time-sensitive financial operation, and he was the legal instrument she was using to perform it. Whatever she was planning, it was happening now, and it would be completed in less than 2 days. He stumbled back to his room in the darkness, the overheard words a frantic drumbeat in his head. The clock was ticking. He had to find a way to escape, a way to fight back, before he was used to complete his family's utter and final destruction. The rising sun did little to dispel the chilling darkness of the night's revelations. The 48-hour countdown had begun. Panic was a luxury Liam could not afford. It had to be replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. He was outmatched and isolated, but he was not entirely without resources. He needed allies. His first and most dangerous gamble was to approach the one person inside the manor who had shown a flicker of humanity, the head butler, Mr. Jenkins. He found the older man polishing silver in a quiet pantry, away from the other staff. Liam stepped inside, his voice low and urgent. "Mr. Jenkins. I know you've served this family for a long time. I know you are loyal. But I am in terrible trouble, and I believe you know that what's happening is wrong." The old butler stopped his work, his hands still. He looked at Liam, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. "I was wondering how long it would take," he sighed, his voice barely a whisper. "I have seen this house do terrible things to people, son. She is consumed by the past." He couldn't offer to help directly. Evelyn's reach was long and her memory unforgiving, but he gave Liam a crucial piece of information. All of her current private business. She keeps it in the small locked drawer of her desk. The key for it is silver. She keeps it on the vanity in her dressing room. She never lets it out of her sight. Jenkins paused, then added, "Except for 1 hour at sunrise, when she walks the eastern gardens. Alone." His second call was to the outside world, to his sharpest friend from law school, David Chun. Making an excuse about needing to pick up some personal items from his old apartment, Liam managed to get a driver to take him into Boston. He met David in a bustling coffee shop, a world of normal life that felt alien to him now. He laid out the situation as quickly and clearly as he could, the coercive marriage, the story of his father, and the financial transfer he had overheard. David listened, his expression growing more grim with every word. "Liam, this is insane," David said, his legal mind already racing. "It's coercion, undue influence, fraud, a dozen other things. But right now, it's your word against a billionaire's. You need a smoking gun. You need tangible proof of that transfer. A document, an email, something concrete." Armed with Jenkins's intel and David's advice, Liam knew what he had to do. The next morning, as the first rays of sun painted the sky, he watched from his window as Evelyn's solitary figure moved toward the East Gardens. It was now or never. With his heart pounding in his throat, he slipped into her private chambers, a space he had never been allowed to enter. He found the silver key on her vanity, then raced to the study. He unlocked the drawer, and inside, his breath caught. It was a thin file. And within it, neatly laid out, were the plans for a massive asset liquidation from a trust co-signed by his father, funneled through a shell corporation. And there, in black and white, was the legal clause, highlighting that the action was only possible through the spousal authority of a direct descendant. He had it. The cold, hard proof. Snapping pictures of every page with his phone, he replaced the file and the key just moments before he heard the sound of a distant door opening. He had the weapon. Now, he had to survive long enough to use it. There was no more time for fear. With the digital copies of the evidence sent securely to David, Liam knew the final move had to be his. He couldn't just run, he had to face her, to dismantle the power she held over him, once and for all. He waited for her in the grand sitting room, the morning sun streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the dust in the air. When Evelyn entered, she found him not cowering in his room, but standing by the cold fireplace, his posture calm, his expression resolute. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. She paused, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "An early riser. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her voice was laced with its usual condescending silk. "It's over, Evelyn," Liam said, his voice steady and clear, echoing slightly in the large room. He didn't raise it, but it carried a weight of finality that made her stop. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Is it now? I believe the final transfer is scheduled for tomorrow. From my perspective, it's just beginning. I know about the Shell Corporation, he stated flatly. I know about the liquidation of the trust, and I know that you needed my name to make it legal. He held up his phone, displaying a crystal-clear image of the incriminating document. And now, so do the authorities. For the first time since he had met her, Evelyn's mask of icy composure didn't just crack, it shattered. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in a brief flash of disbelief that was quickly consumed by a wave of pure fury. You went through my private things, she hissed, taking a step forward. You foolish, treacherous boy. After everything I've given you. You gave me a gilded cage and a legacy of debt. Liam countered, standing his ground. Look at what this has done to you, Evelyn. This obsession, this hatred, it's consumed your entire life. It won't bring Arthur back. It's just destroying everything it touches, including you. For a fleeting moment, something in her hardened expression wavered, a flicker of an old pain. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Before she could unleash the tirade of threats he knew was coming, the sound of multiple cars crunching on the gravel driveway cut through the tension. Moments later, the heavy front doors swung open. David Chun entered, and behind him were two stern-faced federal agents in dark suits. Evelyn Sinclair, the lead agent said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Evelyn's gaze snapped from the agents back to Liam, her eyes burning with the cold fire of betrayal. As the agent stepped forward to cuff her, she never looked away from him. When they led her past, she stopped for one final, chilling word. You may think you've won, she whispered, her voice a low, venomous promise. But revenge is a poison. Be careful it doesn't find a new home in you. He watched them lead her away, the empire of secrets crumbling into silence, her final warning hanging in the air like a curse. The trial of Evelyn Sinclair was a media sensation, a story of old money and dark secrets that captivated the city. When Liam was called to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. He held the power to condemn her, to pour salt on the wounds of a life already in ruins. But as he spoke, he chose a different path. He presented the evidence of her crimes, clearly and truthfully, but he also told the entire story, the story of his father's betrayal, of Arthur Sinclair's tragic death, and of the all-consuming grief that had festered into a decades-long obsession. He wasn't making excuses for her, he was providing context, showing the court that she was not just a criminal, but a victim of a different kind. He testified not with vengeance, but with a solemn duty to the entire complicated truth. His testimony had a profound impact. Evelyn was found guilty, but the judge, citing the extreme extenuating circumstances, handed down a significantly reduced sentence. As she was led from the courtroom, Evelyn paused, her gaze meeting Liam's. For the first time, there was no ice, no calculation in her eyes. Instead, she gave him a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of his mercy, an unspoken truce. Weeks later, Liam was summoned to her lawyer's office. He was handed a thick envelope. Inside was the deed to Sinclair Manor and all its assets, transferred to his name. There was also a letter, written in Evelyn's elegant script from her prison cell. Liam, it read, it was never truly about the money. It was about a pain so deep I thought it could only be silenced by inflicting it on another. Your refusal to continue the cycle of hatred has shown me something I had long forgotten. This house should no longer be a monument to my pain. Perhaps in your hands, it can become something more. Use it well. Liam sold Sinclair Manor without a moment's hesitation. Its grand halls were haunted by too many ghosts, a gilded cage he had no desire to inhabit. The proceeds were staggering. His first act was to pay off every last cent of his family's debt, ensuring his mother's medical care for life and his sister's complete education. The crushing weight that had driven him into Evelyn's world was finally, blessedly gone. With the vast remainder, he did something that would have been unthinkable just months before. He established a multi-million-dollar foundation, and at its heart, a scholarship for aspiring law students. He named it the Arthur Sinclair Fund for Ethical Justice. He had finally broken the cycle. He hadn't just escaped his father's debt, he had transformed it, turning a dark legacy of ruin and revenge into a new story of redemption and hope. A year later, Liam Hayes was no longer the haunted student who had walked the rainy streets of Boston. He returned to law school, but he was a different man. He walked with a quiet confidence, his studies fueled not by desperation, but by a profound sense of purpose. He interned at a legal aid clinic, dedicating his time to those the system often forgot, people who felt powerless against forces larger than themselves. He was finally becoming the man he had always hoped to be. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived for him. The postmark was from the Federal Correctional Facility, the handwriting instantly recognizable. He sat on a park bench on campus, the afternoon sun warming his face, and unfolded the paper. It was from Evelyn. "Liam," it began, "I have had much time to reflect in this quiet place. For 20 years, I believed that revenge was a form of justice, a way to heal the wound Arthur's death left behind. But I see now that revenge is its own kind of prison, and I was its willing captive. Your compassion, in the face of my cruelty, taught me a lesson I never thought I would learn. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength. Thank you for being better than the world that wronged you. Thank you for showing me that the cycles we inherit can, in fact, be broken." Liam folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, a strange sense of peace settling over him. Later that week, he stood before the first group of recipients of the Arthur Sinclair Scholarship. Behind him on the wall hung a simple bronze plaque, the Arthur Sinclair Fund for Ethical Justice, for Second Chances. He looked out at the bright, hopeful faces of the students. "This fund isn't just about paying for books or tuition," he said, his voice filled with a conviction born from experience. "It's about an idea. The idea that our pasts do not have to define our futures. It's about turning pain into purpose, and ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to build a legacy of integrity." After the ceremony, he walked out into the cool evening air, a soft smile on his face. He glanced up at the clear, star-filled sky, feeling the last vestiges of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. Evelyn's letter was a folded square in his pocket, a quiet reminder of the stranger who had nearly destroyed him, but who had, in the end, taught him the true meaning of grace. He was free. Not just from debt, but from the shadow of his father's mistakes and Evelyn's hatred. His life was finally his own, a blank page on which he was ready to write a new story, one of justice, compassion, and hope.